Welcome to the Everyman Commentary Podcast. I'm your host, Auguste, founding editor of The Everyman, and I'm joined today by a very special guest, Dr. Carrie Gress. Gress is the editor of the online women's magazine Theology of the Home, as well as a writer of several books, including The End of Woman, How Smashing the Patriarchy Destroyed Us, The Marian Option, and Anti-Mary Exposed. I have brought Carrie on to discuss her new book, Something Wicked: Why Feminism Can't Be Fused with Christianity, which I just reviewed in the Catholic Thing yesterday. If you couldn't tell from these titles, Dr. Gress is not exactly a militant feminazi ready to have it all, but rather a philosophical and articulate critic of the secular feminist movement. In Something Wicked, she goes into the history of the early feminist movement, showing its anti-Christian roots and how this has been intrinsic to feminism throughout its entire history. She then explains how feminism is incompatible with Christian theology and why it should be rejected entirely, since it fails to acknowledge the basic truths of the faith and is spiritually poisonous for women and the culture in general. I'm going to admit, Carrie, that I was a little disappointed that this wasn't a full-length takedown of the musical Wicked, which the title and the rainbow on the cover strongly suggest, but I'll let it slide for now. The book itself is quite readable and a nice rebuttal to the feminist mythology that has pervaded our culture. So I recommend everyone please go and purchase a copy. And now that I made the plug, it's time to ask Dr. Gress some probing questions and see if I can get some answers. First, Carrie, thank you for coming on and talking with us.
Sure, thanks for having me.
So, okay, I'll start with the basics of the book, work outward. What was your goal in Something Wicked, and who are you primarily trying to reach with this book?
Yeah. So this is my third book on the topic of feminism, and I think that my first book was called The Anti-Mary Exposed, and I wrote it maybe 9 or 10 years ago. So it's fairly dated, and that book was also really only went back to the beginning of the first wave of feminism. So I at that point I was convinced that did I say the first wave? The second wave of feminism.
How many waves are there, by the way? Because I
There are
get
four
confused on this
waves.
question.
But the first wave is the one that I had heard from everyone was the good wave, and so I didn't
Okay.
really need to pay attention to it. And then I wrote a second book, follow up to the Anti-Mary Exposed, which was more of a secular book, or a book that Protestants could read, a little bit more friendly to that audience. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to take 2 days. I'm going to go back and look at these first wave women, get some nice quotes from them, and plug those into this book. And that's where I got stuck, and I'm still sort of stuck reading all about first wave feminism because it was not at all what I thought it would be. It was just I was shocked at just how ideological it was, and how all the things that we see that are wrong in the second wave really started in the first wave. So we can get into that if you want to, but. But what I didn't do in that book, because it was a secular book, was I didn't really just drive home the point that feminism from the start comes from a totally different DNA than Christianity. And actually, Christianity was the target of the feminists, that there was really an effort to try to, transform culture, get rid of Christianity, because Christianity is the tool used by men to enslave women, is really the way that it was articulated back in the 1800s by women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. So that's why it needed to be written. I think also because there's so much, such a large scale effort, both among Catholics, but also among Protestants, of trying to get the two to work together to sort of somehow tease them into a fusion. And I think that's really, problematic, because it's just sowing so much confusion, not to make a pun there. But that's really the problem, is that it's left women not really knowing what to think about themselves, about their lives, about how to live their lives, about what womanhood is, and even led us to that, of course, that famous question of what is a woman.
Well, okay, so I want to ask you about, so there are many waves of
There are many
feminism.
waves. Hmm.
And you're really going after kind of the first wave, and you're right. It is kind of, there's a mythology. There really is. Like before we started this, interview, I was telling you, man, I actually knew quite a few of these names.
Hmm.
Just seeing it as a teacher, assigning texts and stuff like that. And
Hmm.
you're right. First wave feminism, I mean, I've been led to understand, okay, you have these women that we're people too. Um, and they were going for suffrage, right? So you got women voting, women owning
Okay.
property, um, and this is always kind of portrayed as like, they even have movies about it that you get to show in your class, and these women are kind of presented as just part of the tradition of fighting for your rights. And I think it's fair to say, it really does stem from Enlightenment kind of philosophy of liberation, emancipation, that kind of stuff. Okay. Then is it second wave where it's like, okay, you really have the pill, women want to start working,
Mhm.
getting women out of the kitchen.
Mhm.
And
Well,
that, or,
yeah, the
or,
second wave starts with Betty Friedan and the feminine mystique. That's
okay.
the jumping off point there. And I
And that's
chronicle,
what,
yeah,
well, did she write her thing, what, in the 60s?
1963 is
Okay.
the year that came out. So even Simone de Beauvoir is actually considered a first wave
Huh.
feminist. She overlaps a lot with the second wave.
So, and then don't now, so there's that whole movement, and then, so you have the kind of modern feminist movement that
Hmm.
maybe you'll have some of the older generation who still ascribe to maybe those things of just empowering women, giving them access to opportunities in the workforce and all that. Then there was like a third wave feminism.
Yeah, so that's where critical theory comes
Okay,
more into it, and intersectionality and that idea of who's the bigger victim and whatnot. So that's sort of the third wave, roughly, and then the fourth wave, includes men, the whole trans.
transgenderism stuff. Okay,
Exactly. So those are sort of roughly the first waves. I don't know the third and the fourth well, and very well. I know the first two well because they're obviously so much longer. There was so much more variation in terms of just the influences of who was dictating what. Anyway, so yeah, I think that's sort of what you just laid out is sort of the common understanding of it. But I think there's problems with that because it's feminism makes itself sound like it's been this just tool just to help women. And
that's
I
right. Yeah,
think
equal
that
rights, right?
yeah, I think that's really the problem is when you actually go back and look and you realize, there's actually a real ideology here that we have bought into deeply, and this, claim that we're just helping women is really highly inaccurate and really it's certainly deceptive, but it's also a way to silence any kind of scrutiny. That along with you're a man, so you can't talk about this, or the one I get all the time, you have a PhD, how could you possibly be against feminism? That kind of so yeah,
I'll save that
there's a
question
lot
for
more
later,
there.
Carrie.
What's that?
Well, I'll save that question for later about,
Fair enough.
but okay, so it sounds like your goal here was really to kind of revision. I feel like it's a word with baggage, but maybe revise the history a little bit of these first wave feminists, starting from Wollstonecraft.
Yeah.
Maybe highlight some names that kind of go by the wayside, even though for their time and really just objectively speaking, they were very influential, very important. Like you said, Hannah More, right?
Anna Moore's one. Yeah.
Well, okay. So, and I appreciate that in the book, you kind of, because this is what you kind of notice with early feminism, especially in the 1800s, early 1900s,
Mhm.
is that it's tied a lot with social reform.
Mhm.
So I teach AP Lang, college board stuff, and one of the prompts was actually Florence Kelly.
Mhm.
And well, what's funny about the passage? So it's a rhetorical analysis. They're trying to kind of see what the speaker's trying to do.
Mhm.
And at first, you read it's about child labor, like, oh, child labor is bad. We gotta put some laws in place, and it seems like a worthy cause. And then at the end of that passage, which is where I always try to get the kids to go, it's like, and that's why women need to vote because we can vote for people who care about kids because we care about kids because they're mothers, and all that.
Mhm.
And so I get the feeling that a lot of these first wave feminists would appropriate or take on these social reform movements and
Mhm.
kind of twist it to their own ends of really advancing maybe the status of women and maybe amassing more political power. Is that
Yeah.
fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially the first wave, it's really interesting to start looking at the ways in which they are manipulating public opinion because they kind of were like a barnacle on the abolition of slavery. They
Yeah.
they really believe themselves to be a kind of slave like the blacks were in the South in the United States or in England. And it's one of those things that when you start spending more time looking at it and looking at who these women were, most of whom were very wealthy women. In fact, Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were the ones that came up with the idea for the Seneca Falls Convention. It came to them at a spirit table while they were doing a seance. And then they decided to create this declaration, their Declaration of Sentiments. And they actually had to ask their husbands what it was that lower class women would have grievances about or against. So they didn't even know because they weren't low enough class, they were wealthy enough that they were insulated from kind of the struggles that lower class women had. So that's going on. You have another woman named Lucy Stone, who she's adamantly for suffrage, and she's actually really put out during the Civil War, not because there's a war going on, but because nobody's paying attention to women's voting at that point. There's all this concern about blacks and slavery and ending that, but no one's concerned about the women's vote. And so she's, kind of like loses her compass of life because this is her whole reason for existence is been put on hold and no one's paying attention to it. So it's really interesting to just see, it takes a lot of audacity to actually be these women and sort of compare yourself to Black slaves. And I think this is, we see this again happening with civil rights movement where women come along and make themselves victims. And then actually, and I cover this in my book, The End of Woman, this is really where the LGBT movement started also because the homosexual men realized, well, if we can make ourselves a minority, then we will get this victimhood status, and therefore we can sort of attach ourselves to this movement, and there, we'll have all the sympathy, and it will really transform our movement, and that's exactly what they were able to do. So it's an interesting history, and it's one that's definitely not in our textbooks in school. All of these specific kinds of details, certainly the role of the occult, the vilification of Christianity, none of those things are really highlighted. In fact, it's usually more, aren't these really lovely Christian women who just wanted the vote. And not
Yeah,
all of them,
right?
not all of them even wanted that. Lucretia Mott didn't want suffrage for women. There was a much more nuanced discussion going on about it at the time that I think, is just something people don't realize either.
Well, okay. I mean, now I'm going to play devil's advocate as I warned you in advance. Now, yes, the first wave feminists, when you really get into their history, they had a lot of personal hangups. We'll just say, to put it
Yeah,
mildly.
right.
And there was a fair amount of hypocrisy. I mean, that's interesting. You say like, "Hey, poor person, what's bothered you?" So we can kind of bundle that with our cause here. I
Hmm.
feel like that still happens, by the way.
Oh,
Um,
sure.
well, what do you call them? Luxury beliefs. It's like,
Right.
yeah, I can believe in that. I'm insulated. It's fine.
Yeah.
But no, okay, granting all that, right? The hypocrisy, and some of this type of stuff. Could we not say, I mean, and this is what you're going to get, right? Well, you did get the right to vote, right? And I mean, women did kind of like get some rights and privileges that they were denied unfairly, right? I mean, so using a utilitarian argument, can we does that at least redeem them a little bit, or do we need to really even rethink their accomplishments that we tend to celebrate?
Yeah. No, I think that's a fantastic question. One of the things that's really interesting is that feminism is coming along at a time when there's huge shifts happening in the culture, and the home is going from this place that was like the center of life for husband, wife, children, business, garden growing, everything happens in the home. And all of that changes with the Industrial Revolution. The home suddenly becomes like no man's land because, and children become a liability instead of an asset. Mothers have to leave the home for work or employment. Fathers are definitely outside the home. So there's this shift in purpose that's happening already because of the Industrial Revolution. And which is good and bad because it also this is where the wealth is created where people can actually afford a college education and they don't have to be out there learning how to garden and all those things. So the shift is happening and feminism moves in though, and the problem is it misdiagnoses what's wrong with women, and instead of saying, okay, we need to help you be women that are, the fabric of our culture and society. Instead, it says we need you to become like men. That's the goal. This is what the real push is. The male life is much better. Men have a better life. They don't have to raise children. They don't have to have the drudgery of children and childcare for their life. So we need to try to help women move to that stage where their lives are more like men. That's the real kind of progress that they want. So that's the intrinsic problem. And actually, I've even found I have some quotes in the book from Cardinal Gibbons, who was the I think one of the first cardinals in the United States, who's the Archbishop of Baltimore. And he wrote this article in the Women's Home Journal in 1902, and it's called The Restless Woman. And he even identifies what's going on. He says, the big problem is that this women's movement, because that was what it was called at the time, it's focused on the masculine, and it's really at the denigration of motherhood. And this is a huge problem because women aren't made to be masculine. They're made for maternity, for giving life, and not just biological life, but spiritual life, emotional life, all these other aspects of our human life are meant to be, come through women. And this is a huge problem. So even at that point, 1902, there's a cardinal who's recognizing this. I found another bishop of Chicago who recognized the problem and the deformation that's happening. So it's really twisting it. So yes, I mean, certainly there are things that we would be happy to, women to have good things. The fundamental issue isn't the good things. I mean, you can get those by just changing some policies and changing, some laws. You don't have to turn womanhood completely on its head. And I think that's really what feminism has done, is created this false notion of what it means to be a woman. And especially as you get into the 1900s and the work of Margaret Sanger, and then of course the development of the pill, a woman's fertility becomes an enemy to her. Her children become an obstacle to her. Her husband becomes an obstacle to her happiness. So what it's focusing on is this sort of unnatural kind of autonomy in a masculine mold. So that's the real fundamental problem with it. So especially as you progress through the era too, it's when you look at actually what feminism has wrought, especially with abortion and the numbers of dead from abortion. It's sort of that question ends up becoming like, well, weren't there some good things we got from Hitler? I mean, we got the Volkswagen, bug out of it. We've got the trains ran on time, that kind of like it ends up being very dwarfed by the reality of the distortion that happened. So anyway, yeah, I think, it's a great question because it's been posed so readily as, again, women needed these things, but without recognizing that incredible damage that it's inflicted on all of Western culture.
Well, okay, and I appreciate what you're saying there. Now, I want to run something by you, and you can tell me if I'm mistaken. So there are a few things, because if I'm not exactly like, a feminist, okay? I have my own issues with the movement for the same reasons you do. On the surface, it seems fair, okay, equal rights, ability to vote, whatever, equal opportunities. And I
Mhm.
mean, but this is somewhat crude, okay? It's like, okay, the just because you can vote, does that mean your life is better? Just because, you can work at an office, does that mean your life is better? Um, Not necessarily, right? And sometimes it kind of covers over maybe some deeper issues that do require some attention.
Mhm.
So what I understand is that, especially at the beginning, feminism, just suffragettes and all that, the suffragette movement, it was not popular.
Mhm.
It really was spearheaded and led by what we would consider radicals. They were a
Yeah.
minority,
Hmm.
and a lot of women, rightly feared, okay, this is really going to disrupt, kind of our domestic roles, which we actually, halfway enjoy. We're not exactly enthusiastic about working in a factory or whatever, being wage earners. Um, and so there was some pushback. And in fact, it was like these suffragettes that were really kind of, and you mentioned it in your book. I know in England, you had the woman who's like, doing terrorist attacks and stuff.
Yeah. The
Uh,
Pankhurst mother and daughter.
yeah. So, and that's, it's always kind of overlooked. It's like, well,
Yeah.
when you're reading about this history, you just think it's all kind of peaceful. It's like, well, not really. It gets
Right.
they're resorting to kind of what we'd associate with kind of again Marxists or fascists or something. So it wasn't a popular movement, and it really is kind of pushed through. And the other point I was thinking about is like Chesterton. G.K. Chesterton kind of explores this question. He's living in the early 1900s. Again, mentioning what you're saying, it's like, okay, you don't want to be like a guy. It's what he's kind of saying to these feminists. It's like, okay, you want to have the same kind of life that we do, thinking that you're going to feel empowered and happy and fulfilled. And it's like, you really aren't. Most guys, they have like very dull lives. And,
Hmm.
but they're kind of built for that.
Hmm.
Whereas a woman has way more freedom that they don't seem to appreciate, way more autonomy in her
Hmm.
own home. Like she picks out how she wants to build her little world,
Hmm.
and she rules like a dictator, whereas a man is like a little worker bee. He's a drone. Um, okay, and one more point. What would you say? Like, I do want to acknowledge the accomplishments. Okay, getting the right to vote and some of these policy changes. But I wonder, just because of changing circumstances, technology, all that other stuff, like, would this have happened maybe just kind of naturally? Like, okay, we've reached a point in prosperity and in our advancement that, of course, we can allow women to vote and, maybe kind of open up doors to these other kinds of kind of careers and stuff. I don't know. Or did we really need like a feminist movement to kind
Hmm.
of achieve these things, or would it might have happened on its own, maybe more organically and maybe more in line with Christian teaching?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question. And one of the things that I love about Catholic history is just looking at all the things that, all the ways in which Catholicism really has flown in the face of the feminist narrative. Because, and this is one of the things I do in the book is, one of the things you hear all the time is that women aren't allowed to be educated and, that's really being suppressed and whatnot. But if you look at the 1800s, who is it that founds parochial schools in the United States? It's Elizabeth Ann Seton. She's, founds the first one for girls in the early 1800s. And by the 1900s, there's 3,500 Catholic schools in the United States. And most of them are being manned or womaned taught by religious sisters. So the role of education has always been a huge element of the Catholic faith. This is how we end up with someone like Hildegard of Bingen or Queen Isabel of Spain. I mean, these are amazing women who did all kinds of things that didn't fit in line with the stereotypes. And I think, Joan of Arc's another one, Catherine of Siena, like the whole list, it feels like there's so many saints that did things that were really remarkable, but then didn't quite fit in with whatever the norms were at that stage. But this is I think one of the hard things about the feminist narrative is it's read very much through sort of a Protestant vision. Even Mary Wollstonecraft, much of this is being dictated by David Hume, who realized we had to break with Christianity and with the Catholics and the Scholastics. We need to come up with a new good to rely on, and it becomes property. So everything becomes about property in England. This is why you watch the Jane Austen films, and it's all about primogeniture and who inherits land, and all of those kinds of issues. It's very property oriented, and I think this is fundamentally the problem with feminism is it's made female autonomy the property of the period. It's shifted from what goodness, truth, and beauty to property to then female autonomy is really the god that feminists are serving, and that's really where all these distortions come in, and the prioritization of the freedom that women have, and that's gained through our work and career and all of that, those kinds of elements. So I think yeah, I think that it's one of those things that we just need to do a better job of understanding where it came from and what it's about. And it's fundamentally about power and control. And it's not about service. It's not about sacrifice. It's not about self-gift. These things are really working against one another when you're working with feminism versus Christianity.
Well, okay, so let's go there. So you mentioned, and I mean you mentioned this in your book too, that the feminist movement is closely tied with maybe Protestantism. I mean, a lot of the early feminists were Protestants
Unitarianism,
or
yeah.
Unitarians. So, I mean,
Largely Unitarians or the occult,
because
right?
you really do have a rich history. Yeah. You have a rich history in Catholicism of female saints, so just amazing women, starting with our Holy Mother, our Blessed Mother, and then you have Joan of Arc, and you have Hildegard von Bingen, and you have Edith Stein, which again, I really like that you mentioned her because I always want to learn more about her. Or you have Saint Therese of Lisieux, Saint Teresa Avila,
Mhm.
just brilliant minds, very different, distinct, unique people. They don't all just blend together. They all have their own story. Today, I think it's Saint Agatha's feast day.
Mhm.
So just heroic stories of all these people. And so this this is kind of like fuel for our imagination.
Mhm.
And what we're kind of getting at is that people lack an imagination. They don't know how to even imagine a truly a woman in her own element, you know?
Yeah.
It's like they can only imagine success in male terms, and not even like today's male terms. It's like, industrial revolution,
Right.
kind of
Right.
terms, like, or
Mhm.
like you say, property or, autonomy. It's like, because I'm thinking of just how the vote, or, emancipation or the right to vote, it's so cheap now. Okay, you take it for granted. Anyone can do it. Even
Mhm.
convicts are going to be able to do it.
Mhm.
A lot of, without getting into it, versus like, this was a big deal, a century ago.
Mhm.
Um, but okay, I want to move into the Protestant thing. We're seeing it in Catholicism too, and that's something you bring up.
Mhm.
Um, I want to ask you, to what degree has secular feminism, you
Mhm.
know, uh, along with the witchcraft stuff, okay, because we do have to mention that.
Right.
To what degree has the secular feminism already infiltrated the Catholic Church, and what
Mhm.
do you think should be done about it?
Yeah. Um, no, I think this is a hugely important question. The back in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up in Catholic schools and Catholic parishes, the biggest problem then was that, you had all these women religious who wanted to be priests. And
Yeah,
it was such a huge movement. It was really a big deal. There was a book written by Donna Steichen back in the 90s. I think it was published by Ignatius, and it was called Ungodly Rage. And it's a fascinating, historical window into the time period where you see all of these women behaving in ways where they really just trying to get what men have in terms of religious holy orders and whatnot. So anyway, and the priesthood in particular. But what's interesting is that I read that book when I was writing my book, The Anti-Mary Exposed. I revisited Ungodly Rage, and I was amazed because I thought none of this is an issue anymore. We don't really have like the sisters in sweatpants, the nuns on the bus, like these orders have died out or are dying out. Like they're not reproducing themselves spiritually. This isn't really that big of an issue anymore. There may be some hangers on, but it's not like this is it happening in every parish the way that it was, or in every diocese way that it was previously. Um, but I think this is what's that been really interesting, and I talk about this a great deal in the book, is just that we actually have something a lot more subtle happening. And that's where, and maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, there was this start of this push where women who were adherents of John Paul II and his work on women and his one use of the word in an encyclical of the word feminism, apparently used it in a speech and then in a private conversation. So we have three documented cases where he used the word feminism. Um, but they took the idea of feminism and they try to marry it with first wave feminism. So you have this hyper abundance of suddenly Mary Wollstonecraft is this heroine and this model for Catholic women. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony are great.
we're
Even
baptizing Wollstonecraft. That's how I put it.
yeah, I think that's well said. I think that's the right way to put it. And this is really where the problems are, of course, is that these are not models for any kind of Catholic woman. And the problem is it's created this incredible amount of confusion in the church, in a lot of ways. And kind of, there was also this, just the leftover stuff that happened from the 80s and 90s, and so many women who integrated feminism into their way of thinking. And I think feminism really is a way of thinking. It affects the emotions, it affects our thoughts, our actions. It's really more of an orientation, I think, in a lot of respects than what people do per se. But this is, becomes not only just alive in the parishes, but suddenly you have this whole group of young women and young scholars. You've got, there's pockets of all over conservative ministries and universities and programs in the United States who are promoting the work of Mary Wollstonecraft. And I think that if we were in a situation where we even had some kind of adherence to understanding the role of the problems with the birth control pill and abortion among Catholic women, this might be a slightly different conversation. But the reality is Catholic women are aborting and contracepting at almost the exact same rates as the popular culture. So that's not getting better. So then why don't we, you throw into it now suddenly we're supposed to emulate first wave women. And it's just created this incredible amount of confusion about who we are as women and how it is that we're supposed to relate to our parish and to our, the church, even our husbands and our children. And I wrote a piece for the Catholic Thing maybe about a year and a half ago. And I ran it by about four priests before I published it, just to make sure I wasn't, missing something.
I should probably do that sometimes too. Oh well.
Well, it was really important because I mean, I argue in the article that we've basically just made women, Catholic women, mini Betty Friedan's, where it's
Mm,
this idea that, women feel like they can comment and should comment and be involved kind of almost in this cancel culture in the parish. So if father says something I don't like, then immediately either get on social media or you withdraw your money from the school, or you write the bishop. It's this kind of active campaigning that's happening. And this is why we have so many priests who are afraid to say things. And so it hasn't helped that we've sort of baptized first wave feminism and tried to somehow make feminism a good and ordered thing. And I think I lay this out very carefully in the book, just talking about, okay, what was John Paul II's blueprint? He wrote Mulieris Dignitatem. He gives us really a great understanding of what womanhood is. And all of it flies in the face of, what someone like Elizabeth Cady Stanton is doing.
hmm
But that's the key. So if we had actually been more disciplined as Catholics in our scholarship and just stuck to his work, then maybe you could slightly change the meaning of it. Maybe people would be more comfortable with a new feminism. There would be something distinctively new and different about it. But what's happened is it's sort of gotten dragged back into the old feminism, and now it's sort of this weird, very confusing, disordered sense of, feminism and a Catholic feminism is sort of anything that you want it to be. It often includes a lot of woke elements. So I think that's the real problem is it's none of it is really answering the question, what's a woman? Within the context of the church? What is the church obviously is the bride of Christ. That's a feminine um, embodiment. We have the Blessed Mother. None of these things are being used as the tools to understand it. It's being, we're using Mary Wollstonecraft, and I think that's really where the problems are because we're clearly getting away from something ordered, beautiful, compelling, and rich and deeply. The symbolism is deep in our church with all of that structure, and none of that is coming at us when you're prioritizing Wollstonecraft and Katie Stanton and others.
Well, what's interesting and what you make me think of. I do remember, and I mean, you still hear it from people, of women wanting more roles in the church,
Mhm.
okay? Or they believe that the church is patriarchal, that women are held down,
Right.
that we need to have priestesses and deaconesses and
Sure.
whatever. I mean, I think if you ask any practicing Catholic, you tell them this, they would laugh because every church is run by women. I mean, they are. I mean, especially if you're in the burbs here, like
Hmm.
the church council is all women. The women are running the programs. The women are running the children's ministry. And the
Right.
priest is just it's mainly a ceremonial role
Hmm.
to a certain point. I mean, and that's the other thing. The way the priests are kind of managed is like they change from parish to parish, but the church lady, and they
She's
even
not
like
shifted around. Right.
well, but they're the ones kind of setting the tone.
Hmm.
And I mean, and they're the ones that'll insist, right? Like, I need to be a Eucharistic minister,
Hmm.
and they will
Right.
get cliquey about it.
Yeah.
And
Right.
And they're the ones that think, well, okay, I want to speak out to the girls and or to the women in the parish. And and this is where it happens, Carrie. It's
Mhm.
their education. I mean, this is mainly of the boomer generation. This is probably going to change as they pass on, and you have younger generations move up in leadership
Mhm.
roles. But the boomers, man. I mean, they thought they were they peaked. They arrived.
Right.
And so in their minds, I mean, at least this is my impression, and in their minds, they think they're doing a good thing
Mm.
by really kind of introducing and incorporating feminist ideology, which is secular,
Right.
and as you argue very eloquently, incompatible with Christianity.
Mhm.
But they think this is cool, This is like this is what's going to get people interested. You're going to play cheesy music, you're going to have liturgical dancers,
Right.
and yeah, let's kind of baptize Mary Wollstonecraft. I think this really speaks to what women are experiencing today, and and if we bring up abortion, which we never do, I mean, I hardly hear it.
Right.
We're going to do it in the context of, well, it's okay, it's okay. There's so much assurance of a woman who makes that mistake, or
Right.
uh, but that pendulum swings so much that way. It's like, sure, I don't want to vilify or push away women that seek repentance and they don't want to do this, but I don't know, man. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that women are entering these kind of leadership roles,
Mhm.
you know, but they're it's not acknowledged because it's not like an official historical kind of ceremonial position.
Right. Well, I think what you bring up is super interesting because one of the things that is problematic is women have wanted to enter the male space, and in order to do that, they mimic men a lot, and
Yeah.
it's not an identical kind of mimicking. It's actually kind of a distortion of it. It's really interesting to watch. I know that this is something I struggled with as a young woman because I was studying philosophy, and it's mostly men in my classes, and there's a certain amount of argumentation and things like that that happen in philosophy classrooms and discussions and whatnot. And so you sort of feel like you have to take on the ethos of those around you. And I think this is what's happened to women. And you touched on this a little bit earlier, talking about womanhood, was that the women get kind of trapped in this idea of what it is they think they need to look like in order to look like to be like men. And there's never what doesn't happen is this fuller integration of the beautiful feminine characteristics. This was something that was really interesting to research in my book and really it's just been an important theme in my own life. And I think that this is where a lot of women get stuck. And I've even talked to a lot of women who, they're now 50, 60, 70, and they didn't get married. And, one in particular spoke with, and she said, I always just thought it would happen. And it never has. But I realized, I've known her for quite a while. I said, well, you're a lawyer and you've taken on a lot of, the lawyer ethos. You're very challenging when people talk to you. There's this kind of
Gosh,
aggressiveness.
Carrie.
This, someone
Is
I
that how you
knew.
talk to your friends?
Sometimes.
So you're kind of challenging. I'm
Um,
sorry.
no, but this was, I think it was an important thing to tell her
That from a
straight
place
up.
of love. I'm sure.
This, right. And this is someone I know well. So, but I think this is the point is that we get stuck in that ethos thinking this is really what we're meant to be. And I know I was in this ethos. What happens is this focus on kind of work and autonomy, this radical, um, ambition, and then there's an anger. There's this underlying anger that I think gets absorbed into it, partially because some of that is intentional, but a lot of it is just because we're sort of frustrated because our relationships aren't working out the way that we want them to, and we want something richer and deeper, and we don't know how to get it because we sort of what the very things that we think we're imbibing um, through the feminist ideology are actually making us much more difficult to love and to engage with. Instead of if you go to that, that next step of female maturation, which is really the integration of your femininity into your personality and into your workplace and, all of those kinds of things. So instead, we sort of compartmentalize and get stuck in this, this is a person I am at my work, and maybe this is how I act with my mother, like it's instead of sort of being this ordered person who can kind of be this same person wherever you are. Um, So I think that, and I think also the boomers, bought into feminism so deeply. In fact, it's always interesting to have conversations with different generations, and very rarely do I talk to boomers about this at all because I just know it's not going to go well. This is not going to be much of a fruitful conversation because they've so deeply bought into it at various stages. So yeah, I think there's a lot. Um, but at the same time, I will say, I've met some amazing boomers who have one in particular read my book, and she's, totally changed her life. So I think there's a certain, it's a beauty of the church and of understanding humility. And when the truth really sets in, I think people see it and are transformed by it. So I think it's just more a matter we have to provide better models of what womanhood looks like instead of, continually pushing for more power and control. Um, showing what authentic femininity looks like.
Well, okay, let's go there. And by the way, we're not boomer bashers here. I agree with you. I mean, it slips sometimes, but there are many awesome boomers. They listen to this show and
There
they
are
read
a
my
lot
stuff.
of awesome boomers out
Okay, and I think they want to know too, because
there.
I think we could all agree. Okay, we've kind of presented this image, and you really grow up with it. You're conditioned with it of just the girl boss. I mean, whatever you want to call it, girl boss, witchcraft. I
Right.
mean, abortion is just a choice. It's autonomy. It's a sacrament of autonomy, whatever. And we can recognize that's probably not good, all right? But what's our alternative? I mean, yeah, we want to say, okay, look, we got to present women with a Christian alternative, a Catholic alternative that really does that steers away from just being like a little man or just a kind of a feminine man to being like a womanly woman, kind of really
Yeah.
getting to the nature of things. And
Yeah.
so, but it's challenging, right? Because if you're using I'll be honest with you. John Paul II, he's hard. It's hard to read and kind of understand. It's very deep and beautiful and mystical and stuff. Same thing with Edith Stein. I mean, I think a lot of these kind of modern thinkers, I mean, and Benedict the 16th,
Hmm.
it's hard to get into that. I mean, and I said this in my review. I said, okay, the next step in this conversation seems to be, well, what is a woman, right? And how should we present this?
Hmm.
That in a way that's, I guess, palatable, but
Yeah.
also even just like conceivable. I mean, it's almost hard to conceive,
Yeah.
for maybe an older person that's, just kind of been indoctrinated in this, it would be hard for her. And, even for younger generations, it's hard to think, okay, so our ideal here is not Hillary Clinton. Okay. We know that much. But
Hmm.
okay, well, what? Just Virgin Mary? Is that? I mean, I think we kind of get this either or, and I want to know, is there like maybe a middle path that
Hmm.
I think is, attuned to today's kind of situation for people?
Hmm. Well, I think the biggest question is we have to go back to this idea of what a good woman is.
Okay.
We've presented. In fact, it's not at all clear to me that anybody knows what a good woman is because the goal is again, autonomy, ambition, and aggression or anger. Those are sort of inculcated into feminism, into us through feminism, because they are about power and control, and those are the means through which it's gotten. And I think most of us will readily admit that very few of us want to engage with an angry, bitter woman. I think this is one of the ways that feminism has been so successful in staving off conversation, is because it just doesn't usually doesn't end well when that happens. So I think that's one of the first things we have to look at is where are these flashpoints? Where are these ways in which women have become unapproachable? I'm asking I did a talk recently and I asked, it was a small group of women, and I said, do people know that they can disagree with you? And it won't go badly, you won't get upset. And this is one of the things that I've tried to really cultivate in my own life is, do people know that they can disagree with me and I'm not going to, try to slander them or get upset or but really engage with them in a conversation. I think this is hugely important as from a Catholic perspective. But the other piece is, what does it mean to be a good woman? And I think this goes back to understanding really the role of life giving, of being a mother, of nurturing, of all the things that the church does for us. It provides hospitality, security, comfort. It's a place of deep consolation and healing. And this is one of the reasons why I wrote the book Theology of Home, that series, because I don't think as Catholics we do a great job of really modeling this. I think we have a lot of great models, but we don't present them always in ways that are very compelling, or approachable, or really even something that we can grasp onto. And this is why, I think even understanding the home as, I actually go through in my first book, Theology of Home, these transcendentals that are in the home, the church, and heaven. We can say things like light, comfort, nourishment, whatnot. And those need to take place, exist in the home, and they need to exist in our churches. But I think they can even exist in us as individual women. So anyway, I don't want to be too esoteric here, but I think that
Well, that's the
getting back,
problem, right? It gets esoteric.
yeah, but getting back into, first principles of actually modeling this and showing women what it is. Yeah, yeah, even asking the question, what is it that you like about your friends, your other female friends? What are you drawn to? Usually people don't say because she attacks me when I disagree with her, or because she's really
I,
difficult to
I
talk.
like the pushback. I like the prickly
Um,
types.
yeah, well, that might work for you, but I think most of us are not really inclined to that, and I think especially most men are not, given how effective feminism has been in silencing men, in general. So, I think there is something really important. We're seeing this in the mental health issues that we have. We're seeing it in, so many different, the loneliness factor. Like, women create this kind of tapestry in the culture, that connects people. It brings people together, and those are incredible gifts that we have too. So, anyway, I think this is, it's a big conversation, and I think maybe my next book, probably if I write another one, will be on this topic, because it does need to be, brought down to something more, tangible and easily, built out in the moral imagination. And actually, one of the reasons, when I was in graduate school, I actually said I would never work on women's issues. And it was exactly what you brought up, because I thought it was so convoluted and difficult, and there's so much jargon involved in it. And I just thought, I want to be able to talk to regular people about the church and what it is that it can, the ways in which it can enrich our lives. And I just felt like, I can't hand Edith Stein to my best friend from grade school. That's just not going to go down well. Um, so anyway, I think there's a lot of work to be done in this. I think some of it is happening already. Even compared to when I wrote my book, The Anti-Mayor Exposed, it's amazing how dramatically the conversation has shifted from, um, at that stage, very few people really understood what I was talking about, and now it's really a mainstream topic, not just among Catholics, or Protestants, but more generally among conservatives. People are talking about it. So I think it's an exciting time to really start delving into it, because people want more, and I think women have a capacity, to understand deeply things like wonder and meaning and mystery, and to embody those things. And much of that gets lost, and some of this is in the book, in the work of Ian McGilchrist that I explained, but a lot of that gets lost, I think, because we're trying to sort of fit ourselves into this mimicry of the masculine, instead of really exploring who we are. And maybe Hannah More said it best back in the 1780s, 1790s.
Oh, Hannah.
Why would I want to be a cheap imitation when I can be an original, in terms of being a woman? So I think that's, part of the adventure of life, is really discovering who it is that God made us to be, and knowing that there's more than what we've been, that than has been on offer in the culture today.
Well, and I think we're getting somewhere here. Okay. I think you're right.
That's
It's
good.
like, instead of asking, what is a woman?
Right.
Um, what is a good woman? And then you get into the question, well, what is good? What's a good person? Man
Right.
or woman?
Yeah.
And I think the definition, we're not defined by our sins, right? That's JP2 says that. We are not defined by our sins. We are defined somewhat by our virtues, right? And so women have virtues, that as part of their nature. Men have their own kind of set of virtues. And a life of virtue is what leads to a fulfilling, happy life and freedom, right? So in virtue lays true freedom. Um, I'm getting deep. This is good for me. But and I think we mentioned the saints and how unique and different and how big a variety there are
Mhm.
of female saints, right? But male saints too,
Yeah.
and I think it's like, well, where does their uniqueness come from? Where does their power, where does their freedom come from? Well, it comes from their virtue. And so if you're a woman who's lost or a man, I mean, it's the same question. It's like, okay, I need virtue.
Mhm.
If I practice virtue, I can find myself. I can kind of find purpose and meaning. Like my life has meaning, like a definition of a word.
Right.
And so I think instead of, again, I think utilitarian logic kind of really gets into this. Like this, what's the bottom line? What's the effect? Means justifies the ends kind of stuff, and that's abortion all the way.
Mhm.
It's not about how we
Mhm.
get to autonomy. It's just, we got autonomy now. This is what it means. Like, it's so crude. And again, we should kind of move back and kind of go to the virtue part of it.
Well,
Um,
and I would only add to that I think that's where Christ comes in. It has to start with that connection, personal connection with
sure.
Christ. Because virtue, and in many respects, and this is one of the problems with the 18th century usage of it, is it becomes sort of a life hack. It's sort of like if
Well, yeah.
patience. And I think most people don't know the distinction. More of the Catholic tradition and Aristotelian and Thomistic tradition is that there's a real movement that happens in the soul where we look more like God, and we're deeper in union with God, and we're also deeper in union with those around us. So I think that piece is really essential, because that's what everybody wants, is deeper meaning, deeper relationships, and we don't know how to get them. And we women still have this deep desire to mother something, and this is why the pets have exploded, because there's still this desire to care for
Fur
others.
babies.
Exactly. So that's the real tragedy, I think, is that we know these desires are there. We just haven't offered women a way to get them. So in any event, I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I just think that it's not, this isn't just some kind of life hack. There's real, connective tissue on this that I think as
No,
couples we
that's
need
an
to
important
figure out.
point to make. I'm not saying be virtuous so you can be happy. Be virtuous because it is good, right? It is
Mhm.
truth. It is beautiful.
Right.
But, well, okay. I mean, and I think I kind of make my point there. It's just so, and this is my advice as a teacher. I work with young people and adolescents and stuff. I say, look, help other people. I mean, this is what Fulton Sheen said too. Like, you're
Yeah.
sad, you're not happy with where your life is going, you feel like you're being deprived of things. Go help somebody, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's what kind of gets me is that this is what this activism does, this feminist activism does. You know,
Mhm.
instead of looking for ways to help
Yeah.
people next to you, people in your community,
Mhm.
you think about ideology. You think, okay, we need policies, and
Mhm.
everything is telescoped, right?
Yeah.
And everything is made abstract. And you mentioned that in the last chapter of this left, well, no, almost last chapter
Mhm.
of the left brain, left hemisphere thinking is
Mhm.
just like that. That's the activist mold, man. It's just like we're going to simplify things, we're going to reduce things, we're going to support certain policies, and
Mhm.
instead of like having a full, true relationship with another person and
Mhm.
really offering something to them. It could just
Right.
be like you're listening to them, just talking to them, offering friendship to them. I mean,
Mhm.
of course, you're going to provide food and shelter and all those things too. I mean, I don't know. It's just like we don't think of this because again, we're taught not really to think of that.
Mhm.
Um, I want to kind of pivot a little bit. Okay, so I'm a dad, you're a mom, and I think parenthood gets a little confusing when it comes to raising daughters. I have two daughters, um,
Mhm.
and I'm something of a girl dad. I love my daughters. My son, I love him too, but he challenges me more. Um, but okay, so and I always look at other parents and I try to get a feel for like, okay, what are they doing that I might want to imitate? What are they doing that I really don't understand and I might not want to imitate? Okay, so I have traditional types, and they don't allow their daughters to go to college. That's just kind of they don't want that. because they're going to turn into lefties, abort their kids and stuff. Uh, they don't even let them wear pants. Okay, like if you want to go full trad, you have that type. And I guess the idea is that these girls will grow up to marriageable age, find some good Catholic man, and kind of continue this way of life that, to me, just totally distant from today's reality. But whatever. I mean, to each his own, I guess.
Mhm.
And then there's the progressive parents. You got the other end of the spectrum here,
Sure.
and they just want their girls to like kick butt, go to the best school, maximize their earning potential, become good feminists. They're going to support them all the way. And
Mhm.
then there's the rest of us. Okay, back to the everyman, me. Uh,
Yeah.
that we're like, well, we love our girls and we want them to kind of fulfill their potential. We don't want to clip their wings, but we wanted to still be kind of Christian, and kind of
Right.
pass down our values and stuff.
Mhm.
So, what do you say? I mean, in light of kind of what you argue in Something Wicked, and,
Mhm.
and it sounds like your other books as well, what do we do for young women that are a little bit lost? I mean, I think we kind of hit on something with the virtue thing, but
Mhm.
what should young women do? I mean, as far as like looking for a vocation?
Right. Yeah, no, I think this is a great question because, and I get asked this a lot, in terms of like, and even criticized a lot because
Tell me what to do,
I
Carrie.
obviously work, um, and I have a degree, but no, I think it's fundamentally what it comes down to is back to this idea of the way in which our mind is oriented to the world. And I'll explain this a little bit because people haven't read the book or, oh no, Ian McGilchrist, but McGilchrist has this book called Master and His Emissary, and he basically says, there's left hemisphere and right hemisphere, left brain, right brain, but they're not what you think they are. They're actually orientations to the world. And the right hemisphere led mind is one that's couched in context. It's the one that's supposed to be in charge. It has meaning and understands history. It has the capacity to guess, to second guess itself, to say, am I really right about this? The left hemisphere dominant is the one that's much more ideological, which you were mentioning. It just sort of grasps on to things, and it has no capacity to question itself. It just thinks it's right about everything, and it's really. And obviously, I go into this much more deeply in the book, but I think the key is to really get back to this idea of understanding that the left hemisphere is meant to be the servant to the right hemisphere. The right hemisphere needs to be in charge, and this is one of the reasons why literature is important. This is why being out in nature is important. It's finding things that create wonder and create a sense of meaning and order, which is so, our whole faith is really shot through this and just beauty of mystery. And, all of the thinking about God is, always ends up, well, it's just a mystery. I mean, if there's something unfathomable
Mysteries
and
are okay. We're okay with mystery.
unplumbable, exactly, they're beautiful and important and something we'll never get to the bottom of. So, anyway, I think this is really, a lot of respects, the key to raising girls is helping them get out of this ideological mindset and understand that, women have a deep desire to change the world. The Blessed Mother actually has the capacity to change the world. This is because of the love, because she's always following God's will. So when we do God's will, that's when we can actually really affect change. And one of the things that we've done is really stymied ourselves by having the sense of misplaced compassion, by trying to help those that we don't actually know or people we don't actually directly affect.
Or virtue signal. I mean, it comes out like that
Yeah.
too. Like,
Yeah,
okay.
no, all this woke content, but it's this idea, the example of the girl that works for PETA, but she aborts her own child. Like
Yeah.
there's very odd distortion that happens in female life. And I think one of the things that's really important when raising daughters, no matter what the trimmings are that people, choose for them, is the key is to understand that a woman's life is meant to be lived in a very local kind of way. That our children, their first home is in their mother's womb, inside the woman's body. Our arm, anyone who's had a child knows how instrumental her body is in caring for that child until they get to a certain age. There's something very local about the love that women have for others. There's something very important about, being able to look someone in the eye or grab a hand or give a hug. Those things are really important. And I think that this is one of the things that feminism does is it's either radicalizes or sexualizes those things in
Mm.
disordered ways instead of leaving them to be in an ordered way that a woman, can communicate really important depths about herself, but also about God. I mean, I think this is one of the reasons why Our Lady's beautiful and why women are beautiful is it's meant to communicate about the beauty of God, not just the beauty of superficial beauty of a woman. So anyway, I think that it's really going into understanding how it is that we can love people on a local level. And then when we get that right, that's when God says, okay, well, maybe you can do something bigger beyond. But we have to get that right first. And this is what I think we're doing wrong with our education of girls is we're really promoting, feminism promotes a kind of envy.
Mm.
Always women are always comparing themselves to other. I mean, it's very natural vice of women. And so instead of addressing that and trying to help women navigate that, we're actually sort of adding to it because of the competition that we're creating, because of the focus on work and autonomy and all of that. And a wise mother understands deep into her core there's always going to be someone more beautiful, more smart, more skilled, more something. You just have to be who you are and sort of is able to pass that. And fathers too need to pass that on to their daughters and know that that love is really unconditional from the parents. And from there, then you can have this blossoming in the fullness of the personality, instead of going down that ideological train wreck that we're seeing in colleges and elsewhere. So those I think are really the important essentials. Local, being loved, and learning how to love other and sacrifice for others is really the key.
Well, I was going to ask you for some dating advice, uh, but it's okay, Carrie. I think we'll end on those words of
Yeah.
profound wisdom.
Yeah.
Thank you again for talking with me.
Oh, my pleasure. This is
And
fun.
thank you, listeners, for tuning in to this great conversation. Once again, please order a copy of Carrie's book, Something Wicked: Why Feminism Can't Be Fused with Christianity. I'll include a link in the show notes along with my review and a couple of published excerpts from the book, which have been seen around. Also, before you go, please make sure to subscribe to this podcast as well as our Substack, everymancommentary.substack.com. Until next time, please go get educated about the true nature of today's feminist movement. Read the rest of Carrie's books and throw in some treatises by St. Edith Stein while you're at it. Don't date any feminist witches and go in peace.